Okay, so are you ready to dive into this Education Act?
Absolutely. Let's decode this thing.
Yeah, because you sent this over, and it is dense. It's
Yeah.
the Education Act.pdf, and it's all about the Office for Students. The OFS, and this is like our deep dive into what it all means.
Yeah, this is going to be essential for anyone who wants to understand how higher education is going to work in England moving forward.
Yeah, so it's like a new era, kind of.
Definitely a new era, yeah.
So first things first, what is this OFS? What's their deal?
So basically the OFS, they're like the new watchdog for universities and colleges in England.
Okay, so they're the ones making sure everything runs smoothly.
Yeah, you could say that. They're there to make sure things are running smoothly and fairly for everyone involved.
Okay, so it's not just about, like, are they financially stable? Can they keep the lights on? But, like, is the quality of education good?
Exactly. They're looking at the whole picture. They want to see that these institutions are actually providing a high quality education that's going to benefit students in the long run.
So it's like they're kind of raising the bar for what's expected from universities and colleges.
Absolutely. And one of the things that's really interesting is that they're not just focused on traditional universities.
Really? So they're branching out.
Yeah, they're really keen on promoting diversity in the higher education landscape. So that means everything from supporting new and innovative types of institutions to encouraging different ways of delivering courses like online learning or accelerated programs.
Wow, so they're really trying to shake things up. That's pretty cool. But how do they actually make sure all this happens? I mean, do universities just get a pat on the back and told to do a good job?
No, not quite. There's a pretty rigorous registration process that all institutions have to go through. And it's not just a one-time thing either. They need to demonstrate year after year that they're meeting the OFS's standards.
So it's like a continuous quality check.
Exactly. They have to meet what are called general ongoing conditions, kind of like baseline requirements for things like financial stability, quality of teaching, that kind of thing. But then there might be additional specific conditions depending on the institution and any potential risks they might pose.
Okay, so it sounds like they're really trying to hold these institutions accountable. But what happens if they don't measure up? What are the consequences?
Well, it depends on the severity of the situation, but the OFS has a pretty big stick they can use.
Okay, lay it on me. What kind of stick are we talking about?
We're talking about some potentially hefty fines. They could suspend an institution's registration, which means they can't enroll new students. And in extreme cases, they could even remove an institution from the register entirely.
Wow, that's serious business. It seems like they really mean business when it comes to upholding these standards. But with all this talk about regulation and oversight, does the Act address concerns about academic freedom? I mean, could this much oversight stifle intellectual debate and exploration?
That's a great question, and it's something a lot of people were worried about. But the Act actually has a very clear and specific provision that safeguards academic freedom.
They do, even with all this emphasis on following the rules and meeting these standards.
Yeah, they do. It specifically talks about the right of academics to question and test received wisdom and to put forward controversial or unpopular opinions without fear of losing their jobs. They're really drawing a line in the sand on that one.
That's reassuring to hear because you don't want to create a system where everyone's too afraid to challenge the status quo or explore new ideas.
Exactly. It's about finding that balance between accountability and intellectual freedom. You want to make sure that institutions are upholding high standards, but you also don't want to stifle the very thing that makes higher education so valuable, the freedom to think critically and challenge assumptions.
So it's about fostering a culture of open inquiry while also making sure that students are getting a quality education.
Precisely. And that's a tough needle to thread, but it's essential if we want to create a higher education system that's truly fit for the future.
That's a really good point. So they're walking a tightrope here, trying to balance all these different priorities. Now, I know this act is pretty comprehensive, and we've only just scratched the surface. What else is in store for us as we delve deeper into this?
Oh, yeah. There's a lot more to unpack here. Like, one of the other big things this act focuses on is access and participation in higher education.
Oh, so what does that actually mean in plain English?
Basically, it's about making sure that higher education is open to everyone, no matter their background.
So, like, breaking down those barriers that might prevent some people from even considering university.
Exactly. We're talking about things like socioeconomic background, ethnicity, disability, you name it. The OFS wants to see a more diverse student body across the board.
Okay, so how are they actually going to make that happen?
Well, one of the ways they're doing this is by requiring institutions to create these access and participation plans.
Access and participation plans. Sounds kind of jargony. What are those?
Basically, it's a plan that outlines how the institution is going to attract and support students from underrepresented groups.
Well, it's not just about getting them in the door, but also making sure they have the support they need to succeed once they're there.
Exactly. It's about creating a level playing field so that everyone has a fair shot at succeeding in higher education, regardless of their background.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So what kind of things would be included in these access and participation plans?
Well, for example, institutions might need to provide more information about financial aid options or create outreach programs to connect with students from disadvantaged backgrounds. They might also need to develop support services specifically tailored to the needs of underrepresented students.
It's like they're trying to address those systemic barriers that might prevent some students from even applying to university in the first place.
Right. It's about recognizing that not everyone starts from the same place and that some students might need extra support to succeed in higher education.
So it's a more holistic approach to widening access and not just about ticking boxes.
Absolutely. And the OFS has the power to approve or reject these plans. So institutions can't just pay lip service to this. They actually have to demonstrate that they're committed to making a real difference.
Okay, so they've got the carrot and the stick approach going on here. So we've talked about the OFS's role in promoting diversity and holding institutions accountable. But with all this power, doesn't it create a risk of them becoming too heavy-handed? Like, could this stifle the innovation and creativity in higher education?
That's a really valid concern, and it's something that the Act actually addresses directly.
Oh, really? How so?
Well, there's a specific provision in there that states that any conditions the OFS imposes on institutions have to be proportionate to the level of risk they pose.
Okay, so it's not a one-size-fits-all approach.
Not at all. They're not just going to come in and start imposing a bunch of arbitrary rules on every single institution. They're supposed to take into account the specific context of each institution and tailor their approach accordingly.
So there's some built-in flexibility there.
Exactly. It's about working with institutions to help them improve, not just coming down hard on them for every little thing.
Okay, so it's not just about punishing bad behavior,
Yeah.
but also about encouraging good behavior and fostering a culture of continuous improvement.
Right. And that's important because if institutions are constantly looking over their shoulder, worried about being penalized by the OFS, it could stifle innovation and creativity.
It's like that old saying, you can't make an omelet without breaking a few eggs. Sometimes you need to take risks and try new things in order to make progress.
Absolutely. And I think the RFS recognizes that they're not trying to create a system where everyone is too afraid to rock the boat.
Yeah.
They want to encourage innovation and creativity while also ensuring that certain standards are being met.
So it's a delicate balancing act for sure. Now, you mentioned earlier that the Act specifically addresses concerns about academic freedom. Why do you think that is? Why was that such a big concern?
Well, academic freedom is absolutely essential to the whole enterprise of higher education. If academics aren't free to pursue their research and express their ideas without fear of censorship or reprisal, then the whole system breaks down.
It's like the foundation upon which everything else is built.
Exactly. And I think there was a concern that with the OFS having so much power over institutions, it could potentially lead to a chilling effect on academic freedom.
So like if an academic says something controversial or challenges the status quo, the institution might be less likely to support them for fear of being penalized by the OFS.
Exactly. And that's a very real concern. But I think the Act goes a long way towards addressing those concerns.
How's that?
Yeah, exactly. It's like they wanted to make it crystal clear that they're not trying to stifle academic freedom.
You're like, we're watching you, but we're not watching.
Right, exactly. It's a tricky balance to strike, but I think they did a good job of addressing those concerns in the Act.
Yeah, it seems like it. So where does this all leave us? I mean, we've talked about the OFS, their powers, their priorities, but what's the big picture here? What kind of impact do you think this new regulatory landscape will have on higher education in England?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And I honestly don't think anyone knows for sure how this is all going to play out.
It's like we're at the beginning of a new chapter, but we don't know what the story's going to be yet.
Exactly. We've got the framework in place, but the real test is going to be how it all works in practice.
So what are you most curious to see? What are the big question marks for you?
Well, for me, the biggest question is whether this push for accountability will actually lead to a better quality of education for students.
That's the goal.
Right, exactly. But it's not a given. I mean, there's always a risk that institutions will become so focused on meeting the OFS's requirements that they lose sight of what really matters, which is providing a high-quality educational experience for students.
So it's like that old saying, you can't judge a book by its cover. Just because an institution looks good on paper doesn't necessarily mean they're actually delivering for their students.
Exactly. And that's
Yeah.
something that students need to be aware of. Don't just assume that because an institution is meeting the OFS's standards, that it's the right fit for you.
Right. It's like anything else. You need to do your research, ask questions, figure out what's important to you, and find an institution that aligns with your values and goals.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to speak up if you feel like your institution isn't living up to its promises. You have a voice, and you should use it.
Absolutely. Well said. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I think the big takeaway here is that we're entering uncharted territory with the OFS.
Definitely. There are a lot of unknowns and potential pitfalls, but there's also a lot of potential for positive change.
It's a new era for higher education in England, and it's going to be fascinating to see how it all unfolds.
Absolutely. I'm both excited and a little bit apprehensive to see what the future holds.
Well said.
Yes.
So, well, on that note, I think we'll leave it there for today. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the OFS and the future of higher education in England.
It's been a pleasure.
And to our listeners out there, be sure to stay tuned for more deep dives coming soon.